This is the 7th panel that we've done drawing on themes from the Reflecting Addicts exhibit. It really feels fitting as we culminate this series to come together in community to honor Ms. Cass. Like generations of Black Bostonians before her, Ms. Cass organized Addicts Day events on March 5th. These were opportunities for the Black community to come together to celebrate their accomplishments and to lift each other up to go forward. I can think of no better person to lead tonight's conversation than our wonderful moderator for the evening, Melnea Lazu of the Lazu Group. Melnea is a talented and accomplished diversity and inclusion expert who has worked tirelessly for economic development and empowerment. Most recently, she was executive vice president and regional president at Berkshire Bank, where she worked to extend credit to many people and also foster economic development and urban entrepreneurship. Melnea was named as one of Essence Magazine's top 50 founders to watch, and she serves on the boards of Revolutionary Spaces, the Chica Project, the Massachusetts Business Roundtable, and also the Nation Magazine editorial board. So Melnea, welcome and thank you for coming tonight to moderate.
Thank you so much, Anne, for having me, and thank you for giving me the space to honor Miss Melnea Cass in such a powerful way. As an organizer, organizing is something I take quite seriously. It's quite a label that I will give someone if they are actually an organizer. And tonight, it's just an honor to be having this conversation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Before we jump in and get started and talk to our amazing guests, I do want to say that whenever we're having conversations around race, sometimes people jump in with a negative vibe. And so if this space does get Zoom bombed, let's just give us all a second, and the people in the back will handle it. And then we, just like Miss Melnea Cass, will persist and carry on. And so thank you so much for joining us. Miss Melnea Cass was a civil rights activist, and she loved Black people. She was known for her strong local movement organizing and affectionately known as the First Lady of Roxbury. Miss Cass led the way for change before and after the civil rights movement. Her biography is long and quite accomplished. She helped found the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. As a board member and president of the NAACP, she fought to desegregate Boston. Miss Cass helped start the Freedom House, a beacon of organizing in Boston, and actually where I started my first nonprofit, Boston Vote. And Miss Melnea Cass acted locally and helped catalyze a community of Black activists who loved Black people as much as she did. When thinking of how best to explore Miss Melnea Cass and her legacy, it seemed obvious that we should talk to people working within her tradition. Miss Cass was an organizer, and organizers are about the work. And that's what we're going to talk to tonight. It is my pleasure to introduce our guests. And I often like to think while we were putting together tonight that if Miss Cass was alive, we might be having this conversation at her dinner table. Miss Monica Cannon Grant, the CEO and founder of the Violence in Boston, Inc., is a nonprofit to improve the quality of life and life outcomes of individuals from disenfranchised communities by reducing the prevalence of violence and the impact of associated trauma. As a former Black Lives Matters activist, Monica organized 55,000 people last year to protest the murder of George Floyd and the many others murdered by police across the country. She was named Bostonian of the Year for 2020 by the Boston Globe, Social Justice Advocate of the Year by Bostonian Magazine, and one of the top 10 leaders of the year by Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. She has resided in Roxbury and the Roxbury area for 17 years. And Miss Kai Grant, the founder of Black Market, along with her husband, Christopher, creating Nubian Square's first flexible cultural event space with a signature artisan marketplace. She now manages Black Markets Programming, which focuses on reigniting Boston's creative economy. Her family has been in Boston's Roxbury neighborhood for over 100 years. As educators, entrepreneurs, political leaders for real, artists, spiritual leaders, and military leaders. Kai has been awarded citations by the Boston City Council, the Governor of Massachusetts, the Black and Latino Caucus, the NAACP, and a host of local organizations in recognition of her many achievements. Kai, Monica, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's go ahead and get started. And Monica, let's start with you and jump into the core of what I think organizers do, which is build relationships towards liberation. Relationships are a core part of the power, right, of the organized, us coming together, believing we can be free, more free together. And can you speak to the role of relationships in your organizing work?
They're super important, especially in the city of Boston. Anybody who's from Boston knows the importance of relationships. People are less interested in your qualifications and more interested on who you know and who you have a relationship with, for many different reasons, including validation. But the importance of relationships and organizing is important because it helps with the allyship as well as accomplices. I think that sometimes you can get in the weeds with your own organizing around the liberation of Black people and not realize that there are people in the immigrant community and the Latinx community that are suffering a lot of the same struggles. I think that oftentimes Black women get looped into women's movement, but our experience is exclusive, especially women of color. And so being able to build relationships in other communities with other organizers and other activists is super important. Last year, I had the opportunity to build some relationships with some organizers from Lawrence and within the immigrant community at a time when ICE was jumping on the Orange Line train here in Boston and snatching people off the train or asking them if they had their papers. And immediately the activist part of me kicked in and we jumped on the train and used our bodies to prevent it from happening, because if I go to jail at $60, they may be deported to a country where they could potentially lose their lives. And it's those type of things that I think are super important, not to just show up when it's a Black issue, but understand that there are multiple people across the city and state of color who are also suffering.
Yes, relationships help that interconnectivity of us all, and as you said, help us do things that we otherwise wouldn't do. None of us are in here for the money, right? You do it because of the dedication you have to your co-brother and sister and comrade next to you. Kai, can you talk to us just about how you see relationships in your organizing work?
Sure. For me, relationships kind of stem from when you are young, and it comes from your family and your family unit, starting at home and then bridging out to your extended family and bridging out further to organizations and networks that you learn as you navigate the urban setting. Growing up in the 70s and 80s in Roxbury, you couldn't just go to Charlene, or you couldn't just go to Warren Gardens, you couldn't just go to OP, you couldn't just go anywhere where you wanted without knowing somebody. And so you developed a skill set and a way to build networks from a village standpoint. And so I've always had elders and young folk in my world and in my realm. And, I also grew up in a very, I grew up in Highland Park. So there were tons of families that were there when we were growing up. It's very different now, the fabric and makeup of the demographics. And so it was easy for me to go outside and find other kids to play with, or be able to walk down the street to Nubian Ocean, to be able to go get my cocoa butter, whatever it was that you needed. And from there, you know, I built relationships while I was in Medco. I built relationships while I was at the Freedom House in a leadership program called Project Reach. I built relationships through New Covenant as a member of that body, and so forth and so on. So that's what makes it a little easier when it comes down to networking and building networks and building businesses or concepts and visions, is because I tend to be the Kevin Bacon of the city. I know somebody, you know, one person separated, or, you know, it tends to be like that if you kind of build it out that way. And I was fortunate enough to have it built already because my family has been there so long.
Right, right. There were some embedded relationships that came with you. And, you know, while we're talking about relationships, and someone put a really important question in the chat that I'd love to give to the both of you and keep coming in. But, you know, I'm going to get to that question in a second. I would love to talk about what that power, you know, what's the power in relationships. So, you know, Monica, you spoke about, you know, being able to have a group of people that will get on a train and block bodies, right? Kai, you spoke about having a group of people who could bring you to different neighborhoods. You know, could you just help us, you know, maybe understand a little bit more about why relationships get folks to do things?
Well, I guess, you know, oftentimes when you don't have relationships with anyone, it's hard to move people. And I think that's the biggest piece. People are more inclined to follow something that's relatable, something that they can look at and say, I see that in me, I see that in my life, I can relate to that. I think when we think about relationships, we just think about those relationships that we have personally, but being able to relate to people who are in communities of color who are suffering, and more specifically the Black community, is important. It's hard to organize if you can't get people to believe in the thing that you're advocating for, and have them understand how politics is directly related to the fact that they can't pay their rent. The connectivity between when the governor makes a decision on cutting the RAF program, how that's going to affect communities of color who need rental assistance, or if senior programs are cut from the budget, how that's going to affect senior citizens. And I think relationships are important, not just on a community level, but also in realms that make us uncomfortable. Sometimes you have to have relationships with people. You don't have to agree with them. But having relationships with individuals that you can actually push for things to happen. One of the things that I say often is, I don't just want your cell phone number. If I can't call you and ask you to do something for the benefit of my community, in reference to politicians, then I don't want your phone number, because it does me no justice. But if I can call you and say, hey, I have a group of Black girls who are going on an HBCU tour and they're $10,000 short to make this happen, what can you do? That's a different conversation. And I think relationships play a huge role within organizing and activism in our community, to be able to get things done.
Right, right. And, you know, Kai, I want you to, do you want to add on to that at all?
I mean, I think Monica is totally, I mean, she's covered so much with that. You can't assume in your leadership role that you know everything or you know everybody. It takes real relationships to uncover what those needs may be. And it's not that we don't have the same needs, because I always feel like when I'm advocating, I'm always advocating for an entire group to move forward. Like it has nothing to do with one Negro at a time mentality. And I think we get caught up in that here sometimes. You know, if there are issues between leaders, are we prioritizing the needs of an entire community, or are we looking for ego shine? What does that look like as an organizer? You've got to be able to be humble enough to have conversations with folks and understand collective needs, because it's really about moving the needle for an entire community.
You know, Kai was talking about humility, Monica, and I think this gets to a question that was in the chat around the difference between allyship and co-conspiratorship. And I'm glad someone asked that, because I think that we have seen the limitations of white people who are not racist, right? Like, and you know, and how far that has not gotten us. And the term white ally has been around for a while. You know, I personally, when I think about white ally or co-conspirator, I think of a John Brown, right? Like I think of a person, as you said, who's willing to put their body in between me and oppression. Can you talk a little bit about about how you see the difference between ally and co-conspirator? And Kai, after Monica's done, I would love for you to just jump in and talk a little bit about that nuance as well.
Absolutely. When I did my first march in 2017, I figured it out real fast. So one of the comparisons that I like to use that's really simple for people to understand is an ally is the person that comes to the march. They scream Black Lives Matter, they put their fist up, they go home, they eat their cheese sandwich, and then they check off the box that they marched with the Negroes, but there's no follow-up. There's nothing to ensure that they're plugging into that community and actually providing them with resources or assisting with volunteering or figuring out what Black business they can support or where they can show up. For me, I often say I don't want allies, I want accomplices. I want people who are going to be next to me in this fight. And one of the things, one of the stories that I think is a beautiful representation of that is Assata Shakur, and the fact that there were white accomplices that helped her get out of prison and helped her escape to Cuba in order for her freedom and liberation. And so to believe that our white counterparts don't play a part in this movement is delusional and ignorance. We definitely have to be mindful. There's definitely infiltration. There's definitely white supremacy, and I'm on the receiving end of it a whole lot since 2017. But I think it's also important to note that we have white accomplices that are willing to stand and put their bodies on the line and use their privilege in order to aid us in liberation. And it's extremely important to point that out and recognize the difference. But yeah, definitely active. And also I want to highlight every accomplice is not going to be at the march. I think that people think that if you don't go to the march, you can't do anything and you can't show up. I don't think we should dictate how people protest and how they show up. The goal is just to show up. Maybe showing up for you is making phone calls. Maybe showing up for you is volunteering. Maybe showing up is going and finding a Black business to donate reparations to. But I think to not do anything is ignorant, and silence is definitely violence when it comes to Black bodies.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I'm down with John Brown. John Brown, if you want to be an ally or a co-conspirator or any of these fancy names that we make up for folks that are supposed to be doing the right thing, it really is about a radical redistribution of wealth and resources. That's what it comes down to. And John Brown was about that life. John Brown went to the arsenal, opened up the arsenal for Africans who wanted to liberate themselves and got guns out of the arsenal in order to do such and have a revolt. That's who I want to partner with. And those folks that really are about that John Brown life, those are the folks that are going to show you where the money resides. Those are the folks that are going to show you where the resources reside. Those are the folks that are going to come to the aid to undergird, these micro businesses, these artisans, these activists that are out here on a regular basis. And it's those who really understand that they have privilege. And how do you use your privilege? What does that actually look like? Like Monica said, it's on all levels. One doesn't have to reflect the other. Someone who can write a check or push for, some type of self-sufficiency. Those are the folks that I call allies. lives. You know, I'm not into white saviors. We don't need saving. We're not victims. Although we've had atrocities for hundreds of years and generations happen to us.
That's right. People have victimized us, but we are not victims. I think that's such a great way of looking at it. But I mean, I think you guys both bring up a couple of points that I want to pull out and looking at what makes for a good co-conspirator or a good accomplice. It's someone who not only recognizes their privilege, but is comfortable enough to help dismantle it, right? To actively dismantle it in the, you know, where from their lane, right? How best they can actively dismantle and to stick to it. That it's not something that just happens at a march or during a march, but something that happens every day by the choices that you make. And I'll add here, by the things you observe. I have a white mother, and I was one of the earliest like memories I have of my mom talking to me about race was we were at this party and someone asked me to go get them a drink. And I was the only, you know, Black girl there. And my mother was like, no, she can't do that for you. And then she took me aside and, you know, she explained to me why I want to watch that a little bit. You know, I was a kid. I didn't understand what was happening. But as a white woman, she saw that power dynamic. And wanted to make sure that that person knew that that was inappropriate. And I think that, you know, examples like it can be as small as that, that can really make a big difference, especially with the daily microaggressions that happen. You know, if you see something, say something, white people.
And I would add on to that, Melnea. Even now in 2021, what that looks like, what you just described is, even when you're witnessing Black activists and organizers being trolled on social media, right? It's the ability to intervene and say, so no, this is not okay. I think that oftentimes it's this fear of, I don't want that to be me, but realizing that being outspoken and standing up for what you believe in comes with a price. And oftentimes that's not attractive to everyone. It doesn't fit everyone's comfort level. Calling yourself an accomplice is stepping in on those times too. When you see it, say something and intervene.
Mm-hmm. You know, this is a great transition to start talking about values, right? The values you have, no matter what race, creed, or color you are. And values are something that I think, you know, you can say are core to Miss Melnea Cass's life, right? She knew what she believed, and for decades, she fought for that. I mean, when you think about like the Pullman porters and busing, I mean, you're talking about 2 generations of civil rights movements happening, right? Different leaders, and yet the plans were happening at her house both times, or, you know, however you want to, right? She was pouring the coffee and making the toast for people while they were figuring this out, and, you know, and telling people where they should go. And, you know, as organizers do, right? We feed people, we plan with people, and that's a value set. I feel like organizers have a certain value set. And I would love if you can talk about how you center the value of loving Black people in and out of your work. You know, how do you, are there times where, you know, do you bring folks forward? You know, how do you know that you're holding yourself accountable to your values in your work today?
So I think the first thing that's super important is check-ins. Sometimes you can get in your own head, so there has to be people that you check in with, kind of like a sounding board of maybe elders or people who have more experience than you in that space, to kind of do a check-in to make sure you're still working within the lines of your values and not from a place of self. And I think it's super important, because just being somebody who's got a ton of accolades, if you don't check yourself, it becomes an issue. And so just consistently being mindful. But I think that when you have values, it doesn't take much for you to be like, it doesn't take for you to be checked often. And so for me, my mom is still around, and the moment something goes down, she's on my phone. She is a Black woman. She is a licensed ordained minister who, like, the Bible is her second thing. And so that helps me to be grounded. I just lost my grandmother, but before she passed away, she was someone else that helped me to be grounded, just because she did this work for a number of years, and organizing just around voter registration and making sure that Black people understand the importance of voting. My values, I think, for the most part, though, come from my mom. I used to watch my mom bring people home, and they would be sleeping on our floors. She would go, like, down Dudley with a pot of soup and, like, feed the homeless. And this is back when, you know, the church people used to do what they call street ministry. And they're like, we have to go outside of the church. And I think a lot of my values come from my mom in that sense, where I was working at Roca and would bring some of the young men home to avoid them breaking into buildings to have somewhere to sleep at night, even though we weren't supposed to do it. There's the thought of them committing a crime just to have somewhere safe to rest their head was a problem for me. And I think as organizers, you never lose those values. You incorporate them into the work that you do and your passion. The same way I did this work out of my kitchen for a number of different years, made it so that when you get a building or you get a space to be able to expand on that, you just want to do more. You want to house more people. You want to feed more people. You want to help more people get their bills paid. And you want to just do as much as you possibly can. And I think that you're also, in the back of your mind, realize that even if you never got another dollar, you would still do this work. I remember throwing block parties off of my EBT card just because I wanted kids to have a good time, and then having to go and be like, hey, y'all, I need help with groceries this month. And I think that those values are things that come from something Kai mentioned earlier, your family dynamics, you know, things you learn from a child just from being within your family. And yeah, they're super important. Values are definitely important to this work.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you. Kai, I mean, if there's something, you know, I've had the pleasure to know and work with you, and if there's something that I've always admired, it's been your dedication, you know, your value and your love of Black people, and you center that no matter what room you walk in. So please talk to us about that.
But who doesn't? Who doesn't love us? I mean, seriously, there are some white supremacists that are out here loving Black people on the low. And so being Black is one of the most exciting, rewarding things. I am, like, in awe of my ancestors. I'm in awe of just in general what we have done.
You know, Monica, there is a question in the chat that I think you can help answer too, and help us talk about, which is, what do we think Miss Melnea Cass would think of the revitalization of Nubian Square?
Ooh.
And again, we don't know, because we don't know her, and right now someone asked a question, so we're all extrapolating. So let's just, you know, remember that's what we're all doing.
So I think that there's pros and cons. I think that Mrs. Cass would be happy to a degree about the name change and bringing it back to Black people. I think she would be a little disappointed that more Black people don't own businesses in Nubian Square. I think that's one of the biggest things that has been complaints from a lot of people, is that it's called Nubian Square, but you can count on one hand how many Black people own businesses in Nubian Square and the importance of that. I think that if Ms. Cass was alive, she would be advocating for more Black businesses to be in Nubian Square and more ownership and economic advantage to happen down there, because just growing up as a kid, it's just been a thriving community. I remember riding an Orange Line train when it used to lean going through Dudley into Eggleston, and just, you know, I think that would be one of the biggest complaints, but I do think she would be proud. I think we've come a long way. I just also believe that there's so much more work to do in regards to our economy and the Black dollar. specifically in Nubian Square.
Yes, yes. And I want to actually, this made me think of a little tangent that I want to take us on for a second, which is this idea of the social clawback and how do we best preserve the wins, right? So, I wonder if some of the policy and some of the things that was talked about, with Miss Cass would have, be applicable today, right? Could you have taken one of her talks and could you give them today? Because whatever gains we may have gained, we also will lose. I think about the civil rights clawbacks of the Reagan era, right? And
Right.
watching Reagan start clawing back affirmative action and all of these things that we were able to gain during the civil rights movement. And can you talk a little bit about how you think about maintaining and the maintenance of victories and how important it is to not only win, but then protect the win?
So I think one of the most important things is getting people to understand that after the win, the work continues, right? So one of the things I hear often is, okay, you marched, now what? And for me, the now what is the things that we're marching about and advocating for, we actually continue to advocate for through legislation, through taking care of our people, similar to the Black Panther movement. So we at one point had our own food program. We were able to educate our own people. We were able to have licenses to carry to protect our own people. And I think that we march and we protest against police brutality, and then we keep fighting. And so just to give you an example, last year we protested and we marched because of George Floyd and Terrence Coleman and Burrell Ramsey and just all these people who were killed by police departments across this country. Then with the help of Eric Gardner's daughter and Angie Curse, who was Andrew Curse's wife, we were able to pass 2 pieces of legislation in regards to police brutality, which is the Eric Gardner chokehold bill and the Andrew Curse Act. The chokehold bill is self-explanatory, preventing chokeholds, but the Andrew Curse Act is because Andrew Curse died in the back of a police car in Schenectady, New York. And he said at least 70 times he couldn't breathe. And by the time he got to the police station, he was dead. His act makes it so police are required to provide medical attention to anyone in their custody who is in distress. That is the work that continues after protesting and marching through the streets. September 7th, I opened a social impact center where we're now working on providing mental health and COVID food relief and offering resources to young Black men of color who are 15 to 28 years old, those coming home from incarceration. I recently made a purchase of SROs, which are single room occupancy for those coming home from incarceration who may need emergency housing. And that's the work that continues afterwards. And so when I think about what's next, those are the things that need to happen. I think people think that once you win, you stop. And it's like, no, we got to keep that momentum because we won, but that doesn't mean that racism has ended and there's no more civil rights and now we can go home and everybody's good. My grandmother used to say civil rights is won in every generation, and we just slightly push the needle forward each time, but it takes people fighting on multiple levels. It's not just going to be Monica's advocacy. It's going to be what I do. It's going to be what Kai does around economics. It's going to be what the advocates and activists and organizers are doing around healthcare. It's going to be those who are advocating in the education and in housing, all simultaneously gaining wins, checking in and saying, okay, what do we need to do now to keep moving forward to get another win?
Right, absolutely. And I think, another great example is not only the criminal justice reform victories, but also this fight for voting rights. And we're seeing with the victories in Georgia that there's quite a lot of voter reform. And I actually, the last statistic I saw was that there are 250 voter reform bills that limit voting in some way going throughout this country, whether it's state, local, or county level. And it's just another example of how, and so to also just say, white allyship out there, it's the long game. It's the long game that we want to think about. You also mentioned something else, Monica, that I think leads to this conversation around ecosystem. You know, like when you look at the things that Miss Melnea Cass was doing, it wasn't just one thing. You know, she wasn't just like housing is my jam. That's what I do. It almost feels like, you know, responding to the problem of the moment. Can you talk a little bit about how you navigate what you choose to, you know, spend time organizing around, and what you might, you know, just be like, I'm standing in solidarity here, you know, but I'm not necessarily the organizer. You know, like I always say, like, I'm not an environmental justice organizer. Like, it's
Right.
not right. Like, but I will always stand in solidarity with anything that ACE is doing, you know, or that anything that any environmental justice folks are doing. You know, are there ways that you sort of look at, you know, look at how to choose the priorities?
Yeah, I think for me, the reason why I don't jump into every movement and usually just stand in solidarity or use my platform to share what they're advocating for is organizer and activist exhaustion. I think burnout is super real, and I think people don't take that into consideration. So oftentimes you get calls asking you to jump in, like you said, the environmental movement or housing justice or educational justice. And usually what I do is just whoever's organizing, I just show up to support from a place of not wanting to burn out, because you can spread yourself thin. And I've tried to be in part of everybody's movement. And one of the things that my best friend likes to say is you can do 20 things wrong or you can do 5 things right. And you don't have to show up to everything, but you can support. And so when it comes to education, like I was heavy supporter on No on 3. I wasn't an activist in that movement, but when they organized, I showed up. The same thing with housing justice. City Life Urbana does a lot around evictions and making sure people can stay in their homes with dignity. I support everything that they do. The same with environmental justice, because I don't think that what the Black community goes through gets highlighted enough in the environmental lane around asthma rates and just carbon dioxide and things that young Black kids go through around their breathing, living in communities of color that are plagued with just all kind of stuff. So yeah, it's super important to be able to say, you know what, I support their movement. I stand in solidarity. If you can donate, donate. If you can show up, show up. But you don't have to be the leader of everything. It's okay to follow. My grandma used to say, you can't lead unless you follow. And I spent so many years watching and learning and just taking notes and figuring out what best suits me that I can help the most, where I'm not going to burn out. And I'm still learning. I'm not good at it. Anybody calls my phone and says they're in help, I'm all over the place trying to figure it out, but I'm getting better.
And I think that is, you know, the role of an organizer is to respond. I mean, I know I saw this meme going around that I think I don't know who put it out, but it was when COVID shut down, and it said, you know, like, schools shut, borders shut, you know, and then it had that picture of Big Bird, and it was like, organizers, we ride at dawn, right? Like, whenever like things go down, you know, you just those organizers are the ones that are saying, so what are we going to do about it? Do you want to
But
go to my house
also
and talk about
understand that it's okay to jump in and help too. So like when the houses were blowing up in Lawrence, I was like 6 months pregnant. I did a 24-hour drive and slept in Franklin Park to gather supplies. And then Pebbles from 96.9, we drove down to Lawrence with 3 trucks and we helped at that community. And somebody said to me, Monica, who do you know in Lawrence? I'm like, not a soul. But I do know that those are brown people. And anytime FEMA or the federal government shows up, ICE is not far behind, and they're probably not going to get adequate resources, and they're not going to be distributed in an equitable way. So I don't want to see nobody.
So I ride.
Right. So I ride. Also, Malia, you'll respect the fact that an organizer's first response to something is, I'll start the Google Doc for that.
Exactly. You always know an organizer, you know, that, and they never travel alone, right? I always say, Kai, I would love, actually, someone here talked about or mentioned Ujima, and, you know, I think Ujima is another great example of, you know, Nia and others, Aaron Tanaka, coming together to create this thing that then, you know, to create this creative investment, community investment fund that funds community businesses. And I was one of the founders I was one of the founding circle whatevers. I've been loving Ujima since their beginning. But so maybe if you can talk about what you think Miss Melnea Cass would think about the Nubian Square revitalization, and maybe talk a little bit about Ujima and the importance of community investing.
I think it's an interesting question that you pose, because you would really have to think about it from the perspective of somebody that was born in 1896. It might look like progress to her, but to us that are here today, I think she would actually share our sentiment that it's been too long and it's too late, and we need to have a massive amount of energy be focused in on the Black community's commercial district. Why do I say the Black community? Because Roxbury historically, after the South End and after Beacon Hill, was the Black community of Boston for the past 70 to 100 years. Does that negate all of the beautiful Black folks and communities that have been built in Dorchester and Mattapan? No, or even outside of the city. And so what I would say with the land distribution, there's been a major organizing push, even when she was still with us, because I believe she passed and transitioned in 1978. So she saw the highway, I-95. The reason why there's a boulevard named after Ms. Melnea Cass, the First Lady of Roxbury, is because the man, or should I say, municipalities were planning to put a highway through our neighborhood, and they flattened hundreds and hundreds of houses without reparation to those Black owners who own those spaces. And we stopped it. And when I say we, my parents, Chuck Turner, Mel King, all of these folks got together and organized.
Shout out to Byron Rushing,
sure.
who I'm sure was also a part of that, but I just saw his name pop up. So
Oh, beautiful. Yes, and so I think it's important to understand, I think, the perspective of today and how, I think part of the issue is that we've had leaders that have stayed in their positions for 25, 30 years instead of passing the baton. I'm just gonna be 100% with y'all, because that is a huge issue. We're not training the next generation for bench strength. On May 31st, one of the first rallies in Boston kicked off, and we went down the Black market to support it. We opened up our doors, we put out our music, and we started playing music from our generation, Public Enemy and the like. And what happened was we had this convergence of amazing energy from a new generation of activists. The intergenerational organizing is super important, and I think that's where we've missed it. And I'm not sure if she would be critical about that. She would probably just start to organize around that. And so instead of being critical, we take up our tools and we move forward with action. It's what we do. We move forward with action. People out here, there's a lot of talk, and at the same time, we're still in the middle of an opioid crisis, let alone a global pandemic, and nothing has been done about this. Not one thing, not one resource. Where's the Long Island Bridge? I mean, there's so much, and I think she would kind of feel as though there's so much more to do.
Yes, and Kai, I think that's another big point too, that what would Ms. Cass do around the opioid crisis, right? I think that was probably something that she definitely have supported and figured out what to do. So we are coming to a close, and so I just want to thank the two of you for joining us and ask you if you could very quickly, and Kai, we're going to start with you in case we lose you again. If you could give us, a Miss Cass send-off as an organizer, what should we take and do tomorrow to help live Miss Melnea Cass's legacy?
I mean, those are some big shoes to fill. You're talking about the First Lady of Roxbury. I think that it's really a matter of us being able to combine forces wherever we can around specific issues and be able to humbly come to the table with solutions and with resources. And it's going to take multiple generations. It's going to take Black people organizing amongst themselves and then adding allies on, and allies that don't usurp, and allies that don't overstep their boundaries, but allies that are willing to listen to us and letting us lead this next generation, and letting the next generation actually have opportunity to express what activism looks like to them.
Thank you. Thank you. Monica, what about you?
I often am in the space of never wanting to have to fill those shoes. I think they are really large, but what I will say is that we all have an obligation to continue to do the work that we're doing from a place of values, while recognizing, and something I tell my children all the time is, I don't have Megan Thee Stallion kneecaps, so I can't do this work forever. And so if we're not passing the baton, if we're not passing down knowledge, if we're not sending the elevator back down, of the work that we've done and our accomplishments so that they can continue this fight, then we do an injustice to the next generation. But not just mentioning young people, incorporating them into the work that we're doing, because they are already working, they're already on the ground. They just need some support, and support them without your biases and without inflicting on them what you want them to do, but giving them the space to grow and learn while giving them tools and just tidbits. I think one of my biggest frustrations coming up as a younger person in the organizing and activism world was, I used to always ask, hey, can you teach me? Hey, can I learn? Can I sit up under you? I just want to know what to do. Can you direct me? And I oftentimes got told, you're not ready yet, or it's not your time. And then you become what a lot of senior people call rebellious and decide, I'm not going to wait for you no more. I'm just going to ask for forgiveness and do what I'm going to do. And I think we have an obligation to change that culture, pass down the knowledge and the information, because a lot of them so desperately want it. I know I still look for information from those who've been doing this work. I still call those who've been out here working for years and just, hey, can I bounce something off of you? And I'm feeling this way. Can you give me some insight? And so I think that that's the way that we keep Melnea Cass's legacy alive.
Well, ladies, thank you so much. And thank you so much, audience, for your questions. We really wanted to embody Melnea Cass's legacy. I think any organizer, that's how they want to be honored. I'd often, wonder what Martin Luther King would think of all the money that was spent on building statues for him. I think he would say build housing for the poor. So thank you so much, Kai. Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Monica.
guys.
Sometimes when we, yes sir, don't know the word, we hum. See, today we are celebrating Melnea Cass. The work that she put in for her community to make sure that there were jobs available. We are honoring the woman of who she was. And so, as we speak and honor Black women on this March Women's Month, I ask that you listen to these words and celebrate with me, praise with me. And I come from church, so humming is always something that we invite everyone to do. So in your rooms, just hum with me. The Black girl speaks of praising. Oh, speak, Black girl, what do you do? I praise. Oh, speak, Black girl, what is your reality, honey? I praise. How do you endure them? How do you take them? I praise. They call you mules, weigh the world on your back and judge by how you carry them. How do you endure them? How do you take them? I praise. They place the crown of upside down while you bleed and call you queen? How, black girl, do you still invoke them I praise? What right have you in all your wholeness to demystify, to be genuine, to carry heaviness, to dream, black girl? I praise. When do you have time to decolonize, to teach, to imagine, to destroy, to love, to know, to fix, to cry, to create an illusion to strength, to see, to be, black girl, or just be? Learn to praise. Yeah, 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 yeah. Sometimes when we don't know the words we Thank you so much for having me. I hope you guys enjoy your night, celebrating this beautiful, beautiful women who have honored this existence on this earth. And I pray that you are reminded, rather, to celebrate the Black women in your life and all around you. Peace. My name is Jija. Thank you so much for listening.